In the lush green pastures of Germany, a little girl named Heidi gazes at the soaring eagle in the sky. She happily spreads her arms, feeling the freedom of the eagle's flight. Her Aunt Data walks with her along a country path to a village. Most of the villagers make a living through simple farming. At this moment, a woman catches up, learning that Heidi is to be sent to her grandfather Alpohi's home. The woman hurriedly follows Data, saying that Alpohi is reclusive and fears he may not take good care of Heidi. Data is somewhat displeased and asks the woman whether it would be more appropriate to send Heidi to an orphanage or entrust her to a stranger. Because she does not want an additional burden at home. Heidi, being lively, takes off her heavy dress and wants to go play with the goats. Data calls her back and takes her to the mountaintop. At the top of the mountain there are a few houses, but they are all in disrepair. An old man is standing at the door chopping wood. Heidi happily greets her grandfather. The reason for this visit is that her Aunt Data has found a job and can no longer take care of Heidi, so she hopes Alpohi will raise her. Alpohi is not as pleased as expected. He angrily raises his axe and shouts for them to leave. Deta takes Heidi aside and tells her that she must stay here. After all, Alpohi is Heidi's grandfather, and although he is strict, he would never harm her. After saying this, Deta kisses Heidi on the forehead and turns to leave. Seeing Heidi return, Alpohi is very angry and loudly calls after Deta's departing figure, demanding that she take Heidi away. The clever Heidi understands that her aunt, who has cared for her for 5 years, has abandoned her. She feels very sad and murmurs to herself that her aunt no longer wants her. Alpohi irritably walks into the house, closes the door, and no matter how much Heidi calls, he does not open it. At this moment, the sound of the sheep attracts Heidi's attention. Under her grandfather's watch, Heidi reluctantly walks into the sheep pen and spends the night hugging the flock. The next morning, Alpohi comes to the sheep pen to milk the sheep. With sharp words but a kind heart, he still scoops a spoonful of sheep's milk for Heidi to drink. However, he still does not want to adopt Heidi and plans to take her to see the pastor. Only the pastor can find a suitable adoptive family for Heidi. The pastor carefully examines Heidi and ultimately concludes that she is very strong and easy to care for. But Alpohi insists that Heidi cannot live with him. He does not want to take on the responsibility of raising her. The pastor helplessly states that in 3 days, he will take Heidi to Mayfield to see if anyone is willing to adopt her. If no one adopts her, Heidi will have to go to the orphanage. Before leaving, the pastor still does not give up, stating that caring for his granddaughter is Alpohi's duty to God. But this did not change Alpohi's mind. Back home, Heidi innocently asked her grandfather if she would still sleep in the sheepfold that night. Alpohi vaguely responded, letting Heidi decide for herself. Heidi walked straight into the house, happily surveying the furnishings inside. The table, chair, and bed were very simple, clearly indicating that her grandfather had been living alone. She climbed up to the second floor and saw it covered with grass. She joyfully rolled around on the grass and told Alpohi that she would sleep on the hay that night. She loved this place very much. During mealtime, Heidi again mentioned to Alpohi that she did not want to go to the orphanage. Grandfather still did not respond, which made Heidi a bit disappointed. But the sensible girl did not say more. A new day arrived, and Heidi was attracted by the sound of the sheep being herded. After hurriedly drinking sheep's milk and washing up, she opened the sheepfold and let out all of her grandfather's goats. Alpohi asked the shepherd boy Geisenpeter to take Heidi up the mountain to herd the sheep. Geisenpeter stared intently at the cheese and ham that Alpohi had brought for Heidi, swallowing saliva continuously. He really wanted to eat, but his family was poor, and he had no chance to taste such food. In conversation, Geisenpeter was very curious about why Heidi was living with Alpohi. Heidi told Geisenpeter that her parents had long passed away. Previously, her aunt had entrusted her to her grandfather. She had lived with her aunt in Bad Ragaz, but could only stay at home, with no happiness at all. She loved the time spent running freely under the Alps, like a young eagle, cherishing this vast land. While making a fire, Heidi was playing with the goats. Geisenpeter took the opportunity to open Heidi's package and secretly ate a few bites of food. When discovered, he argued that it was not him who was stealing, but the goats. At that moment, 2 goats suddenly started fighting, and Geisenpeter quickly picked up a branch to intervene. Angrily, he stated that he would teach them a lesson and whip them. But this method of intervention was something kind-hearted Heidi could not agree with. She then made a deal with Peter that if he no longer whipped the goats, she would share half of her food with him in the future. The two reached an agreement. Peter took Heidi to discover a groundhog, whistling to imitate the groundhog's call and encouraging Heidi to try as well. Unfortunately, Heidi could not whistle at all. Playful Peter threw a stone, scaring the groundhog back into its hole. The two had a lot of fun. Innocent and carefree children experienced the joy of companionship for the first time. Afterwards, Peter urged Heidi not to tell Alpohi about sharing the food, because there were rumors in the village that Alpohi had killed someone. Back home, Heidi was very scared and anxious, did not dare to eat, so she told Alpohi that she still wanted to sleep in the sheepfold that night. Alpohi guessed that Peter must have said something. He held his granddaughter's slender arm and patiently explained, "Some people like to gossip, and what they hear may not be true. One must believe what they see with their own eyes and judge right from wrong with their heart." Heidi ultimately chose to trust her grandfather. She rushed forward to hug him and returned to her beloved haystack on the second floor. The granddaughter's hug stirred emotions in Alpohi's heart for the first time. The next day, Alpohi brought wood to prepare a surprise for Heidi. Meanwhile, Peter, who was herding sheep up the mountain, and Heidi painted their faces with berries. He happily expressed that he would take Heidi to see the Edelweiss the next day. However, Heidi was not very interested upon hearing this, as she was to follow the pastor the next day to find a family willing to adopt her. Peter angrily threw away the remaining berries because starting the next day, he might have to herd sheep alone again. Perhaps he was reluctant to part with the delicious lunch, or perhaps he was unwilling to lose this hard-won playmate. Feeling sad, Heidi returned home and saw a brand new chair. She cautiously asked if the chair was prepared for her. Though she was filled with love, her heart was heavy with reluctance and sadness, because she was to leave the next day. Grandfather suddenly spoke, saying that Heidi could still follow Peter to herd sheep the next day and the day after as well. Heidi understood the meaning of this sentence and joyfully hugged her grandfather. Because grandfather decided not to send her away anymore, she could stay and play forever in this beautiful nature. Although Alpohi did not say it, he had already grown fond of this granddaughter in his heart. From then on, Heidi, like a little fairy, never felt bored in the beautiful nature. The originally calm lake surface rippled as the two children laughed and chased each other carefree among the mountains and waters. The two returned home happily, bringing joy to Alpohi as well. Peter took the initiative to inform that he would be going to school the next day and would not return until spring. Hearing the invitation from her playmate, Heidi also had the thought of going to school, but did not receive a clear response from Alpohi. For the first time, Heidi followed Alpohi to the village to sell goats. The villagers coldly discussed, believing that Heidi should not live with Alpohi, thinking that Alpohi was unable to support this little girl. Heidi silently held her grandfather's hand, knowing deeply how much he loved her. The pastor walked into the shop and told Alpohi that Heidi should receive an education. But Alpohi refused. He felt heartache for Heidi, as the young girl was unable to descend the mountain alone during the cold winter. The distance from home to the village school was far. The two had no choice but to pick up their luggage and return home hand in hand, one old and one young. The winter Alps were beautiful, yet cold. Though he claimed to lack nothing, Grandpa still carved a wooden eagle for Heidi upon returning home. Heidi gazed at the snow outside the window but could not feel happy. She eagerly awaited the arrival of spring, longing to play with her friends. Seeing this, Alpohi took out his treasured sled, gliding all the way down to Peter's home. At this time, Peter's father had long passed away, and he lived with his mother and grandmother. Peter's grandmother was blind, but had an optimistic attitude and warmly welcomed Heidi. During the meal, kind-hearted Heidi wanted to save some bread for her grandmother. But when Heidi saw her grandmother's teeth nearly falling out, she realized she couldn't bite into the bread at all. At that moment, she suddenly thought of her own grandfather, Alpohi, who was also elderly and had white hair. At night, Alpohi carried Heidi home on his back, and despite the freezing cold, he felt very fortunate in life. Heidi had a healthy grandfather who loved her dearly. At that moment, not only was the snow white, but two hearts were also gradually drawing closer. As winter passed and spring arrived, the Alps regained their former beauty. When spring came, Detta also arrived again by carriage. She happily announced that she had found a good family for Heidi, friends of her boss. Alpoi had never liked this aunt and felt disgusted by her contradictory behavior. But Detta had already learned from the villagers that Grandpa did not allow Heidi to go to school. She scolded loudly, saying that if Heidi stayed here, she would only become an illiterate child. Only by following her to the wealthy family could she have a bright future. This time, Grandpa Alpohi became furious. Unwilling to give up, Detta found Heidi again, but Heidi did not like the so-called wealthy life at all. She only loved this place and her grandfather. In desperation, Detta deceived Heidi, saying that going to the wealthy family was a joint decision between her and Grandpa. Both hoped that Heidi could have a good life. When Alpohi saw only Geisenpeter returning alone, he felt something was wrong and hurried to the village. But he was still a step too late. Detta and Heidi had already left. Listening to the mockery and harsh words of those around him, Alpohi felt both hurt and angry, and could only return home in solitude. He once again experienced betrayal and loneliness. Heidi curiously boarded the train for the first time, hurriedly crossing through the crowd, standing at the end of the carriage, just to catch one last glimpse of the distant Alps. Barefoot, Heidi stepped into the big city of industrial civilization for the first time. The bustling scene before her filled the young Heidi with curiosity. Detta brought Heidi to the magnificent mansion, and looking at this splendid building resembling a castle, Heidi felt everything was incredibly novel. The housekeeper was very displeased to see Heidi, who was both small and dirty. Aunt Detta hurriedly handed Heidi over to the housekeeper to receive the agreed payment and turned to leave. Miss Clara of the mansion was very fond of this special Heidi because Heidi could climb mountains barefoot and dress in boys' clothes, unlike herself, who had to adhere to all the rules in this place. Clara, who was disabled and unable to walk, had Heidi push her wheelchair to accompany her on walks. During this time, Heidi accidentally knocked over a vase, and the housekeeper was very angry. But under Clara's protection, she couldn't say much. At dinner time, Heidi curiously watched the busy servants. Having grown up in the mountains, Heidi did not understand table manners. Her rude behavior of eating with a plate made the housekeeper even more dissatisfied, and even the servants couldn't help but laugh. Even when asking for just one more piece of bread, the housekeeper had to teach Heidi to use polite language. Heidi repeated it many times but couldn't learn, so she secretly took a piece of bread and put it in her pocket. The housekeeper did not notice and began explaining the rules of the wealthy family to Heidi. But as Heidi listened to this pile of incomprehensible words, she gradually fell asleep. In her dream, she saw an eagle, the Alps, and her beloved natural paradise. The next day, upon waking, Heidi looked at the strange and luxurious room and wanted to open the window. After climbing onto the windowsill, she found she couldn't open it. A servant rudely helped Heidi wash up, complaining about the dirt on her. Fortunately, during the meal, Clara patiently taught Heidi table manners step by step, showing her how to use the utensils. There was no prejudice among children, only the joy of companionship. During study time, Heidi opened her textbook, and the words in it seemed like a foreign language. Heidi couldn't read a single letter. She believed what Geisenpeter said was true, that children in the mountains didn't need to know how to read. The teacher, exasperated, found the housekeeper. The housekeeper, already displeased with the rule-breaking Heidi, was even more furious that she couldn't recognize letters and claimed she would send Heidi away when the master returned. The teacher returned to the room and saw Heidi standing on the windowsill, trying to open the window, half forcing and half scolding her to come down. Heidi then hopped and sat on the chair, starting her first day of learning. After class, Clara told Heidi about her mother. It turned out that Clara's mother had passed away when she was young. Later, a serious illness made Clara unable to stand anymore. Now, Clara's father was too busy making a living, spending little time at home. Clara was like a canary, always confined at home. During the lunch break, Heidi asked the male servant Sebastian to open the window, because she wanted to see the mountains she once lived in. Unfortunately, in this mansion, she could see nothing. In today's big city, one can only see distant mountains by climbing a tall tower. So, Heidi quietly took Clara out of the house. No child does not love freedom. Even well-mannered Clara wanted to see the outside world. Because everything in the bustling streets is full of novelty, Heidi led Clara all the way to the tower, and Clara watched Heidi climb to the top. but the longed-for distant mountains were not within the tower's view. As far as the eye could see, there was only a gray haze shrouded in thick smoke. At that moment, Heidi missed the Alps immensely and missed her grandfather even more. On the other side, the housekeeper, who discovered the young ladies were missing, became furious and searched the streets for the two. And Clara, who had never seen small animals since childhood, bought a cute little cat on a whim. An anxious Sebastian found the two on the street and successfully brought them back to the mansion. But upon returning home, before the housekeeper could even get angry, she began to sneeze, until a little cat ran out, startling the housekeeper into a panic. After a farce, Sebastian finally sent the little cat away. The housekeeper, extremely angry, blamed the entire incident on Heidi and punished her by making her stand without dinner. The coldness of that moment made Heidi realize that even though the conditions here were good, it was not her home. Without warmth that belonged to her, no one truly cared for her, except for Clara. So, Heidi picked up the bread she had secretly saved over the past few days, packed her bags, and prepared to leave alone. But before she could step out the door, she was stopped by the housekeeper. Even though Heidi explained that Dita had said she could leave at any time, in the housekeeper's eyes, this country girl had such a good opportunity yet insisted on going home, which was both infuriating and puzzling. Since the fees had already been paid, Heidi was not allowed to come and go freely. And the bread she had secretly saved was only meant for Geisenpeter's grandmother, so she could truly taste soft bread. Clara, seeing her only friend about to leave, sadly cried as she walked away. Heidi could only silently accept this splendid cage. Even in her dreams, Heidi constantly missed her grandfather. The next day at mealtime, Heidi did not see Clara. After inquiring, she learned that Clara was sick because of Heidi. Heidi then quietly went to Clara's room. Clara genuinely loved this quirky friend. Heidi was free and happy, unlike herself, who was bound by rules with no joy, only loneliness. Since Heidi's arrival, Clara had truly felt happiness, so she wanted to keep this only friend. Time flew by in the eyes of children, and Heidi was still struggling to learn her letters. At this moment, Clara's father returned, and the mansion became busy. When Clara's father saw his beloved Clara, he became much more cheerful and, loving everything about her, took a great liking to Heidi, his daughter's friend. Clara's grandmother arrived, allowing Heidi to feel the warmth of elders other than her grandfather for the first time. However, the housekeeper claimed that Heidi had issues, being illiterate and unruly, completely a child lacking in upbringing. But the grandmother did not mind and expressed her desire to talk to Heidi personally. At night, the grandmother told Heidi stories about shepherds, patiently guiding her in literacy. Afterward, the grandmother told her son that Heidi was not incapable of learning, but simply unhappy. Because Heidi had lost her freedom and was restricted everywhere, like a free eagle trapped in a cage. However, Clara's father believed that as long as his daughter was happy, that was enough. At night, when the maid secretly drank, she heard strange noises and thought it was a haunting. Sebastian discovered it was just the door that had not been closed. Later, the master inquired about the strange occurrences from Sebastian, only to receive an explanation of supernatural phenomena. Days passed and Heidi gradually learned to read, able to recite storybooks. This excited the entire family, including the teacher. The master even promised his daughter that Heidi would stay with her forever. But only the grandmother noticed Heidi's loneliness and sadness. When the grandmother left the mansion, the last person who understood Heidi also departed. Every night, Heidi would take the wooden eagle carved by her grandfather to remember him. Meanwhile, the master and the doctor waited each night for the ghost to appear. In the end, they discovered that all the strange phenomena came from sleepwalking Heidi, from this child who longed for the outside world even in her dreams. The master followed Heidi back to her room and, while getting her a blanket, found that she still had many pieces of bread. When Heidi woke up, she explained that the bread was for Geisenpeter's grandmother. She told the doctor that her chest hurt a lot, and that was the pain of missing her grandfather and her hometown. Afterward, the doctor believed that Heidi was physically and mentally exhausted from excessive longing, and that it would be best to send her back to her hometown. However, the master felt that this would make his daughter Clara even sadder. Reluctantly, the master still brought up the idea of sending Heidi home to his daughter. Clara reacted very strongly. She did not want Heidi to leave and did not want to lose her only friend. Angrily, she smashed the items in front of her to vent her emotions. Heidi looked at her angry friend, unsure of how to comfort her. It was only after Clara left that the master told Heidi that he would send her home that very day. This made Heidi feel joy for the first time. But then she thought of her friend. Kind-hearted Heidi wanted to say goodbye to Clara, but Clara did not want to see her. Before leaving, Heidi reluctantly left her cherished wooden eagle with Clara, hoping that one day Clara could enjoy the beautiful Alps with her. With soft bread in hand, Heidi returned to the familiar village. The villagers had never seen a girl dressed like that. Peter happily took Heidi home, always remembering his friend who had shepherded with him. Finally, Peter's grandmother got to taste the soft bread, and finally his friend could enjoy the sausages. Back among the mountains and waters, Heidi took off her luxurious heavy clothes, running up the mountain, finally seeing her longed-for grandfather. The old and the young embraced tightly. Life seemed to return to the past, shepherding with Peter in the morning and dining with her grandfather at night. Another year of heavy snow fell, and when the entire village was covered in white snow, Heidi and her grandfather moved into the village to live. And Heidi also returned to school as she wished. When the teacher asked everyone about their dreams, Heidi unhesitatingly expressed that she wanted to be a writer, but was laughed at by the whole class. But they did not know how profoundly fairy tales influenced Heidi. From Clara's grandmother teaching Heidi to read, to later Heidi teaching Peter to read, it all relied on that storybook. Heidi missed Clara, missed her friend, and kept writing letters to Clara. In fact, Clara had been gloomy since Heidi left, regretting not having said goodbye to her friend. It wasn't until her grandmother brought Clara to the village and she saw Heidi that Clara finally smiled. After all, both of them deeply missed each other. He met Clara's grandmother for the first time, and the grandmother hoped Clara could stay here for a few more days to regain her happiness. The two elderly people sat together drinking, watching the two children talk. It was the friendship between the children that tightly connected two families of vastly different wealth. Clara and Heidi slept together on the haystack on the second floor. Heidi played with her, shedding her gorgeous dress, and in the picturesque scenery, Clara played with the goats for the first time. When Peter first saw Clara, he wanted to shepherd with Heidi, but Heidi was unwilling to leave Clara behind, which made Peter walk away angrily. Clara told Heidi that she also wanted to grow up here, but was born into a family full of rules. Here, Heidi gradually taught Clara how to eat, how to drink milk, and enjoy cheese and bread without worrying about appearances and rules. The two dined together, played together, made wishes together, and fell asleep together. The scenery in the mountains became even brighter because of the two innocent girls. Since Clara's arrival, Heidi has somewhat neglected Peter, which made Peter feel left out. In a fit of anger, he pushed Clara's wheelchair off the cliff. Grandfather knew it was Peter's doing, but did not expose him in front of Heidi. He silently carried Clara up the mountain and entrusted the two to Peter. He let this momentarily confused boy take care of her as a way to make amends. Unaware, Heidi wanted to invite Peter to play, but Peter still refused, more out of guilt. Clara gazed at the distant Alps and finally understood why Heidi insisted on returning. But her legs prevented her from exploring this beautiful land. She felt unwilling to accept this, gritted her teeth, and slowly stood up with the support of a rock. With the help of Heidi and Peter, years later, Clara was finally able to walk slowly. With the encouragement and company of her friends, Clara began to practice walking every day. Until Clara's father came to pick her up, he looked down on this rural area with its dilapidated houses and messy paths. He felt that everything here was a humiliation to his daughter, until he saw his daughter walking towards him step by step. At that moment, both the father and grandmother were stunned, unable to believe their eyes, and the three of them embraced each other in excitement and tears. Before leaving, the grandmother gave Heidi a diary. However, Heidi was not happy because her dreams were mocked by her classmates. The grandmother told Heidi that a writer needs to see a broader world to have a deeper understanding. Those classmates had only seen this village, so they could not comprehend. Do not mind the opinions of others and persist in doing what you want to do. Just like how Heidi was determined to return to her grandfather no matter what back then. After Clara left, Heidi insisted on writing in her diary every day. She ran in the scenery, feeling the beautiful nature, as if returning to the time she first arrived, like a free eagle soaring in the boundless blue sky of the Alps.